I'm just going to show you how to create different things inside Autodesk Sketchbook to respond to this task. So if you go into Sketchbook, choose New Sketch, save the sketch that's there already if you want to keep it, otherwise say discard. I'm just shrinking the paper. So I'm going to work on the right hand side and I'm going to use the left hand side for source material. So I'm going to use the rectangle tool to select an area and fill with a dark colour. So I've used the rectangle tool and I'm just going to get a dark colour here, very dark blue, deep blue, maybe this blue. I get the fill bucket and I'm going to click in that area and then deselect. So that's my background colour. So you'll see on the right hand side, I've got that layer there and no other layers. So I'm going to add another layer on top. And then I'm going to get an image. I'm going to get a Rosie, I'm going to get a Yolanda James image to inspire me. Yolanda James. So if I just look for an image that I like by her, that's in my collection, one that I might take on. So yes, I'm going to take this one in, the reef, and I'm going to open that up. So I'm going to make it smaller and knock it off to the side as a reference picture for something to look at while I'm working. Okay, I'm going to now bring in an image that I want to draw. So I've just been on all the images that are in the slides, so they're here to pick. So you need to save the images that you want into your Google Drive. So I'm going to use this image here. So you need to have in mind the kind of image you want to make. So I'm just going to shrink that and knock it over to the side as a reference picture. Okay, so I'm now going to draw on a layer above that. Or I could move this layer out and put it on top of the other ones. So I'm not going to draw on the photograph itself or the image that I'm looking at or the background layer. I'm going to draw on a separate layer. So I can use paintbrushes. So I would advise you to explore your paintbrushes. So if you choose a colour that will show up on the background. So if we have a look, this is from the brush library, a felt tip pen. So I clicked on here to discover what it is. That's the kind of line it makes. That's the size, the flow, the wetness. So just have a look at which brushes do what and what you like. So this is like a highlighter pen. Makes a different sort of mark. And with any of the brushes, you need to know what setting they're on. So if you click on the brush, it will tell you what it is. So it's told me it's a vintage marker. That's the size it's drawing at, 3.9 at the moment. And the setting is here. So it's on that side, so I can make it bigger. And you'll see that this line goes bigger. I could make it a bit harder to paint with, so as if it's not very flowy and not very wet. Okay, so I could also choose, I'm going to undo that one. So I could also choose a pencil. See what a pencil looks like. So it's on very small. If I increase the size of it by clicking and dragging over, then I get a much bigger mark, and you'll see it's got a fuzzy edge when it's bigger. So you need to decide which pens and pencils you like, which ones you can change the opacity for. So if you look on the settings, I could make it a bit see-through by pulling it down, and then when I draw with it, it's not so bold, it's a little bit see-through, and you'll see if it crosses over itself, it will make it go lighter as if there's been another layer of that colour added over the top. So sometimes you don't want that when you're colouring in, sometimes you do. Okay, so I'm gonna choose, I quite like this brush at the bottom. So I'm going to choose this brush down here and I'm going to paint the colours of this. Now you can use the colour picker, which is this eyedropper thing. and pipette, and you choose the colour from there, or you can just try and match it yourself. So I'm going to draw one of these circular shapes. So I'm going for, oh, I've got an enormous brush, so that's not what I want. I need to shrink that down. So you click and drag left to shrink down the size of it, or you can click on the brush itself, the brush settings, and pull it down that way. Now I can see the opacity is not up very much, which is why it went on really pale. So I'll give that a go. Okay, yeah, so that's quite nice. So I'm going to try and draw a shape similar to the ones that I can see there. Okay, so I'll change the outer edge to a bluish kind of colour. And then I'm going to paint over that. This is a bit see-through still, you can see. I'm going to increase the opacity a bit higher so it's not a see-through brush. So I'll go over that again. I quite like the organicness of it, so I'm not going to worry too much about that not being perfect. So I'm just going to try and get a deeper blue. Yes, and I'll take the colour down. So I'm just going to show you a few techniques. Actually, that might have been better as a see-through brush. So, sorry, I'm just going to click on that and pull down the opacity a bit. And also possibly make it a bit smaller. And go over that again. So if I put another layer on, it'll go darker because it's as if you take off your pen, it's as if you're putting lots of layers on. Okay, and then I'm going to add this lighter, wiggly sort of section. So I think I want, yeah, blue like that. It's pretty good. Okay, so I'm going to make this edge a bit lighter here. So I am trying to make it quite organic. Although if you look at Jelena James, it's very precise and careful. So I am going to go around the edges a little bit, make it a bit more perfect, but I don't want it to look too round and sort of perfectly shaped. Okay, so in the center, to change the color, you just go to the color wheel. In the center, it's quite light. And then there's some areas of light on the outside. So I'm actually going to get that highlighter pen. Just check the size of it. I think it's a bit big, so I'm just going to shrink it down. And then I'm going to add some lines on the outside here. So take your time to sort of finish your line at the angle that you want it to be at. Look at Jelena James, look at how she organises the layers of her image, how she looks at shape. So when I'm moving around here, it changes the angle of the line, which changes the thickness of it. So also how I'm holding the actual stylus affects that as well. So I'm now going to use this pen tool, which is quite small, on a similar colour, but I'm going to change the opacity. So I get a fine line, because I want kind of lines that come from the centre. So we're looking for detail, varying weights of line. So the more interesting, the more observations you can make, the more interesting you can make your components. So this bit does take a bit of time, but it's worth it for your image to look strong. I'm just going to make a time lapse of this. Just press record. Okay. So now I'm going to go for these big green shapes on the outside. So I'm going to choose a really vivid green. And I'm going to use this brush still, but turn it up to a bigger size. Let's just check the size of that. No, I think I'll still make it bigger. So you can undo things if you don't like them. Okay, that's a pretty good size. Now I can see that it's a bit see-through because the colour wasn't that intense. So I'm going to pull the opacity up. Okay, and then I'm going to go around the outside and make some shapes to indicate something like what I can see in the photograph. So remember that Jelena James stylizes her drawings, so they're not all exactly as you would see the object in real life. So you're kind of getting an essence of what's there, and you're simplifying it to make it illustrated. So I'm just going to add a few more of these. Now this is where the fun stuff happens. So we've got one. You can see here there's multiple ones. So I'm going to duplicate this layer. So now I've got two. You can't see two because they're on top of each other. So I'm going to get the transform tool, and then I can move the second one and change the angle of it and the size of it and say done. Okay, can do that again. Duplicate the layer. So again, I've got another one on top of that. I'm going to grab it. So go on transform. I'm going to rotate it. Maybe I'll put it over here. So you can very quickly build up the picture. Now on this one, I might use HSL to change the colour slightly. Make it, actually I want it more orange. Okay, that's quite nice. So you can intensify the colour as well, or you can make the colours more dull. I think I'll intensify it, although I do think that orange is a bit bright. So you can lighten it also and darken it. So I might make it a bit darker. I do think that orange is a bit intense. So if there's a particular colour that you don't like, what you can do on that layer is use the selection tool and pick the orange. But you do have to go around and get each one, although it doesn't take that long. So let's say I wanted to modify the colour of some of them. So the ones that are touching, it's just grabbing them all at once. Okay, I'm just going to show you how to modify the colour in them. So I can either use the paint bucket and fill them with a colour, or I can just paint in them. So let's say I wanted them to be a bit more pinkish or red, maybe might look better. So I could get a big brush and then just paint over those. It's very subtle, but you can see that the ones that are selected are changing colour. So then if I go to select and deselect, you can see that those few have changed slightly. Okay, so that's one way of repeating those. So we don't need this layer anymore. I'm going to throw this layer in the bin. So if I right click on it, I can press delete. So then I could bring in a picture of something else to draw in the same way that I brought in before. I'm just going to show you how to do a shape like this on another layer. So if I was to then add a layer, oh, it's gone underneath. Just make sure you know where you are when you're adding layers. So if I want to add a layer, it always goes on top of the one that I'm on. So I'm over here and I'll say add a layer. Now I'm going to draw the outside of my shape using a pinkish kind of colour. Okay, that's a very big brush, this pen. So I'm going to shrink the size of it. So I'm dragging across and I'm making the pen small. You can try it out and see, still very large really. Now I'm going to make this pen a little bit see-through because I don't want a very bold line. So I'm going to drag on opacity on the settings. So here, I'm now on another layer. I can draw. So this is how you overlay shapes. So let's say I'll draw that. Now, to fill shapes in, they need to be solid. So where they join, where I joined the line has to be a join with no gap in it and no hole. Otherwise you won't be able to select it. So I can now select, using the magic wand, the inside of that space. So I've got inside the ring selected, which means I can now paint in that ring. So I'm going to go back to my favourite brush at the bottom. I'm going to make it very big. I'm going to keep that colour. I'm just going to check the opacity. So I'll pull the opacity down a bit and I will colour in this space. That's too bold. So the opacity needs to come down a bit more. I want a see-through shape as Jelena James has got here. You can see it's got like a pink halo kind of inside it. So I'm just going to do it with the stylus. So you can see where I've overlapped tones, like here. A few layers of it on, it goes on darker, so just be careful. Now I'm going to leave that selection there, and I'm going to go back to the pointy pen, which is on a very thin pen, and if I draw with that pen, it will draw a very fine line. Now let's just check the opacity of it, because it might be too low down. Okay, so I'm going to increase the opacity so that I get a bolder line here. Now this is where the fun starts. So I'm actually drawing outside the shape, but because I've got the selection still made, it won't draw beyond the shape. So it makes it very easy to control what I'm doing. So try to use lines that curve over the form. So I'm using curvy lines to make it look like this is a round sphere. So I'll show you how to deselect it in a minute. So imagine that I'm taking my time and doing that really, really carefully. So make the lines kind of curve over the form, and then you can go to select, deselect, and then you've got that shape with a really nice outline and really nice detail in it. Okay, so remember you can transform any selection, so you could move. You could decide that that doesn't look very good over there. You might want to bring it over here. You might want to turn it around. You can use these flip horizontal, flip vertical tools. You can also use a warp tool, which is this tool here. So let's say you wanted it a bit more round. You can kind of pull it on the corners to make it more the shape that you wanted it to be. Okay, any work that you do, you need to save. So you can see how she's made this picture. It's all layered. Every time you do something, go on a different layer, because then it gives you opportunity to change things. So I could turn this into like a blue shape if I decided that I don't like it in that colour. So you can see you can move it along the slider. You can make the colours a bit more intense. Because it's see-through, it's not that obvious, but you can see here a little bit of it changing its colour. But you can only do that if you do things on different layers. If you have them all on the same layer, then the choice is a bit restricted. So keep bringing in pictures of sea plants and different life forms, under the sea life forms. Look at the patterning that she uses and try to build it up by layering. You don't have to use a dark background if you don't want to, because you can see that you can take it away and you can still build it up nicely. So you could have, instead of that colour, you could have a pale blue colour, let's say. So you could just select it in the same way, click on there. So that's now selected, and we could fill it even with this colour here. So let's see what that looks like. So the beauty of doing it on the computer is that you can explore. So you can see what the pink colour does to it instead. So just try and play around with different things. When you've finished, go to Share, Save to Device, and then you just call it something here. So we'll call it Jelena Inspo and say save.